Hey everybody, it's Wednesday morning. It's time once again for Ask Chuck Dixon. This is where you get to ask me, a longtime comic book professional, questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. We're gonna get deep here. We're gonna get deep into characterization, stuff like that. And we're gonna start with Neil Matthews. Will the Alt Hero Q comic be coming out in trade paperback format anytime soon? Yeah, when we have enough for a trade paperback. Alt Hero Q is a series that runs on Arctoons. It's had a couple of issues published on actual paper, but I think we're going to wait for the trade, as they say in the trade. It has been collected in Brazil, where it was extremely popular. So if you read Portuguese, you can pick up a copy there. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that appears on Arctoons will eventually make its way to paper. But right now, our concentration is at Arctoons, which, if you haven't heard of it, is a free digital comics platform, high res. Dozens and dozens and dozens of different comics, every genre you can imagine, from horror to humor to crime to espionage and, yes, superheroes. Alt Hero Q is... I'm going to be quite honest. Alt Hero Q is a right-wing fantasy. And why not? The left wing have their fantasies. Things like The Handmaid's Tale and West Wing. So why can't conservatives and conspiracy theorists have theirs? It's very much akin to X-Files in that we have a rogue treasury agent, a slob hero, the kind of guy I like to write about. He's kind of a slob version of James Bond. And he takes his orders from the mysterious Q, which you hear so much about. And, Q is a web presence. Mysterious, quite actually, frankly, really a mysterious web presence. And Roland Dane, the hero of this series, he travels the world battling the deep state, globalism, and corporate conspiracies. And if you think that's crazy and wild and nutty, well, what's James Bond been doing since the Cold War is over? Battling globalists and corrupt governments and corporate conspiracies. So Roland Dane is, out to right the wrongs with the guidance of Q. He's very much an outlaw. He's being hunted by people from his own agency, along with many, many other intelligence agencies and criminal organizations. And his first adventure takes him to South America, to Ukraine, some chasing around here in the United States. And I've already written his second adventure, so there's lots of material to come. And you can see new weekly episodes of Alt Hero Q on Arctoons. Every week they upload a new episode, and I think you'll enjoy it if you like espionage, if you like fun, global conspiracy stuff. Regardless of your politics, it's still escapist fiction. It's still a fantasy, and I'm having a lot of fun writing it. The research is sometimes a bear, but often all I have to do is watch the news or read the Wall Street Journal, and there's plenty of grist there. It's very much happening in the world that we live in right now, where distrust in our governmental and corporate leaders is at an all-time high. So delve in to Alt Hero Q if you get a chance. Did I mention it's free? Tommy Bagley, I'm sorry. If you're inviting me to be that familiar. Hey Chuck, as the best writer to ever work on Detective Comics, I know you must be well versed in classic detective fiction. Who makes your Mount Rushmore? Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, Jim Thompson, Mickey Spillane. Thanks for the kind words. I don't know what to do with these compliments. I really enjoy my work, and it's a lot of fun for me. It's not like I'm out here sacrificing anything to entertain you, because first and foremost, I'm entertaining myself. But I always appreciate it. An attaboy. So thank you for that. crime writers, Dashiell Hammett is absolutely number one with me. Dashiell Hammett invented the modern, well, I don't know if he invented the modern private eye story, but he certainly came up with all the plot lines that are still used today. Things like the Maltese Falcon, the Dane Curse, the Glass Key, the Thin Man, and indelible characters like Nick and Nora Charles, Sam Spade, the Continental Op. But the cream of the crop for me is Red Harvest. If you haven't read Red Harvest, you know the story. If you've seen the samurai movie Yojimbo or the spaghetti western A Fistful of Dollars, they very closely follow the plot line of Red Harvest. Now, Red Harvest takes place in a town it's a made-up town called Personville. But Dashiell Hammett is drawing on his own experiences as a Pinkerton detective in Butte, Montana, which is a mining town, rough town. The Pinkertons were brought in to deal with a corrupt police department, sheriff's department, and a whole bunch of grifters who had shown up to basically run the town. So if you saw Yojimbo or Fistful of Dollars, you know what I mean. Two rival gangs, and Hammett and the Pinkertons played both sides against the middle. Created a gang war, basically cool things out. Red Harvest is the novelized version of Hammett's own experiences in Butte, Montana. And it's lean, mean, badass fiction. Still to this day, it's the hero is morally compromised. I mean, his favorite drink is grain alcohol mixed with laudanum. So that gives you any idea what kind of guy we're dealing with here. And this was during Prohibition. So he is no Boy Scout. But Hammett is the best because he drew on his own experiences as a detective. And he was a Pinkerton. It was rock'em sock'em, shooting and getting punched and all the stuff that detectives do. And he pretty much refined the genre. Chandler's the next one, and Chandler comes at the detective fiction from an entirely different perspective. He was a lawyer. Both men started writing late in life, so they had a lot of life experience to draw on. And for me, all of the Phil Marlowe novels, that's what Chandler did. He also wrote for Hollywood as well. But all the Phil Marlowe novels, they're amazingly written. He elevated. If you watch or read a Private Eye pastiche where the guy's talking in all kinds of colorful language, you can thank Raymond Chandler for that. His use of metaphors and similes and vivid descriptions, that's all Chandler. And he was really good at that. He was also good at the big scene. When you walk away from a Chandler novel, you remember these scenes. You'll carry these scenes with you for the rest of your life. You may never remember the plot because that's where Chandler falls down. But it doesn't matter. The writing is so good. He wasn't a very good plotter. He certainly wasn't a clear plotter. While making the movie The Big Sleep, a movie with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, Howard Hawks and the writers, William Faulkner and Lee Brackett, actually contacted Raymond Chandler because they couldn't figure out who had actually killed one of the characters in the story. And Chandler admitted he wasn't real clear on it either, even though he had written the novel. But in the end, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's his writing is so wonderful, and there's so many great takeaway lines. One of my favorites is, she had a figure that would make a bishop kick out a stained glass window. He had a face like a collapsed lung. Just sparkling writing. This guy had a way with words, absolutely spectacular. So if you ever get to read one of these, I suggest you pick one up. Another guy that I would put on my Mount Rushmore that many of you probably have never heard of is Cornell Woolrich. Now, Cornell Woolrich was kind of an odd guy. He was a closet homosexual who lived with his mom in New York City, and apparently was tormented by all of this, by having to hide the true nature from his mother and probably from himself. But this led to some great crime novels that deal with people leading double lives. And the best of them, he wrote under a number of different names. He was very prolific. He's most remembered for writing the short story upon which Rear Window is based. But the best of all of them, in my opinion, was Rendezvous in Black. Rendezvous in Black is the first real revenge novel. The lead character, Johnny Darr, is going to meet his girlfriend in front of the drugstore. She dies by some horrible mishap, some freak accident. And Johnny Darr spends the rest of his, existence going after the men who were responsible. And he wants justice, so he doesn't want to kill the men. He wants to kill the thing they love. In other words, he wants them to feel the same pain that he felt. And but the most remarkable thing about the novel is that in each chapter, after the first chapter, after the setup, we don't know who Johnny Darr is in the story. And you don't learn until the end of the chapter who he is and who he's there to kill. The suspense is excruciating in this novel, and it's so beautifully written and so dark. The final chapter, if this guy never wrote anything else but the final chapter of this book, he would be my favorite crime writer ever. It takes place. It's written from the point of view of a blind person. Now think about that. In this chapter, we don't know who Johnny Darr is, and we're seeing, quote unquote, seeing everything from the point of view of a blind person. That's high cotton. That's the bar raised all the way to the top for a writer, and Woolrich leaps over it with seeming ease. So if you've never heard of Cornell Woolrich, you can look him up. He also wrote under the name William Irish, and everything the guy wrote was gold. Just sparkling gems of really dark, noirish, hard-boiled crime. Jim Thompson? Yeah, I put Jim Thompson up there on Mount Rushmore of crime writers. He's famous for The Killer Inside Me. He wrote the novel that the movie The Getaway was based on. And this guy was hard-boiled. This guy was a 20-minute egg, if we're talking about hard-boiled. He had a way with words, and he wrote paperback originals. This was during the paperback explosion, when paperbacks were huge. They were the Netflix of their day. And every drugstore had, hundreds of paperbacks, huge paperback aisles. And people couldn't get enough of them, and there wasn't enough new material. And so basically, you could get away with a lot in these paperbacks if you could turn work in on time. And Thompson wrote these great novels about lowlifes and psychopaths and sociopaths. The movie The Grifters is a very good adaptation of one of his novels called The Grifters. And he would set up these situations and just bring you into this seedy, dark, creepy, totally morally compromised world. And he wrote with such an authority about con men and corrupt lawmen and corrupt lawyers and things like that. And they were pure, well, I guess the publishers saw them as pure exploitation because, there's sex, there's violence and everything else. But they're really elevated to literature because he just had a way of painting a picture in your mind with very few words. And the novels always end with an unforgettably horrific scene. And sometimes subtle, sometimes nuanced. Sometimes it takes you a little while to oh my God, I just realized what he's talking about here. And he didn't go into garish, purple prose descriptions of anything, and that makes it all the more effective. He leaves a lot up to you. You have to bring a lot to these stories when you read them, and that's not hard. Because his prose is so evocative that you're like, oh, you're just, it's just terrific stuff. Not for the faint of heart. I mean, this stuff's written in the 50s, and it can be hard to take. That brings us to Mickey Spillane. I love Mickey Spillane. I read them all. I've discovered Mickey Spillane. Well, I didn't discover him. My uncle used to read Spillane. And I sort of started picking them up when I was 15 or 16. And, these books are so hormonally driven. It was a perfect age. They're just loaded with sex and violence. And often the mysteries don't quite work. But you don't care because Mike Hammer, Mickey Spillane's signature character, is such a primal creation. And the stories just move along like a bullet. He was a very economical writer, and the books are as politically correct as it is possible to imagine. I wouldn't put him on the Mount Rushmore because he's sort of the end result of Chandler and Hammett and Private Eye writers who went before him. He's kind of the end of the road. So, I mean, this is where the Private Eye genre was going to, just boiling it down to its essence of just gun battles and hot babes. So, but he made tremendous contributions to the genre and muscular writing. And when I was a kid and older, he was often a guest on television, and his interviews were always memorable. I think on NPR you can find his interview. I believe it was Fresh Air did an interview with Mickey Spillane, which if you can ever get a hold of, it's priceless. This is a guy who always spoke his mind. Smart guy. I mean, he doesn't get the credit for how smart this guy was. He knew his audience. He knew what they wanted, and had a terrific sense of humor, very dark sense of humor that he never let you know. He never let you know that he knew he was being funny. So I remember him being on a panel of other mystery writers on a late night talk show, and they were absolutely appalled at almost everything that he said. So yeah, I love Mickey. And he was a comic book writer. He wrote some Submariner. So good for him. Douglas Osiris, I'm guessing there. As an aspiring writer, I'm well aware that writers get their ideas from anywhere and everywhere. Recently, a news article involving a vicious series of crimes has ignited an idea for a story I would like to tell. However, I can't go forward with it because I feel as if I'm exploiting someone's tragedy. Do you ever feel this way? If so, what advice do you have as a writer for overcoming this? As a writer, you owe no one anything. Wherever your stories come from, that's where they come from. Now, where it would go wrong is if you took this tragic event that you're referring to and you exploited it. In other words, you just wanted to write something to titillate people. I'm not about that at all. Now, I understand where you're coming from. I write a series of novels about Levon Cade. He's a vigilante for all intents and purposes, and he works outside the law. And the most recent two books and the third one that I just finished, it's the 10th one in the series, all three of them deal with Levon running into a child sex trafficking ring. Now, this is dark material, but I don't in any way want to write it to be titillating. You understand what I'm saying here? I want you to be horrified and appalled, but I don't want to go into any kind of detail about the horrendous, horrific things that happen in the world of child traffickers. We're seeing it all from Levon's point of view, but I don't tell you everything that he sees. It's enough to know, and I think we all know, these people are wretched. I don't need to go into descriptions to get you to strongly dislike these people and to set them up as worthy of Levon Cade's attentions. So I don't feel bad about writing about it because it's an issue that's happening in the world. So there's no stepping around it. And quite frankly, it's great grist for a story about Levon Cade because Levon Cade is a character who rights wrongs. He's a vigilante justice guy who seeks justice where the law cannot reach. And we've all heard about child sex trafficking, but apparently it's an enormous problem. It's an enormous outrage globally. So why wouldn't Levon go for it? Because the people that read these books, they want that catharsis. They want that cathartic feeling that this character is, taking care of business. But again, I'm not exploiting this tragedy. I'm not writing to, give anybody a thrill. That's the last thing in the world I want to do. And so I'm it's like Lovecraft and his, unnameable horrors. He left it up to your imagination what the horrors look like. It's quite the same what I do in Leave Uncaged. I mean, there's a writer who writes about exploitation of women, exploitation of children, and he's very popular, has been popular for quite a long time. But his books always make me feel queasy because I feel like they're exploitative. He's a little too into it, if you know what I mean. And I don't want to deal with that. But as a writer, you're going to change it anyway. Whatever this event was, I mean, you're going to change it because you can't know everything about it. So you're going to have to make a lot of stuff up. And I assume that you're talking about writing a fictional exploit of it. But, tragedy, horrific events, suffering, and, these are all real things. And if you can write about them effectively and find something new there and inform the reader, you should do it. Now, on this very subject, P.G. Wodehouse had a great quote, and I'm paraphrasing here, but someone asked him, about writing and writers, and what kind of writer was he, or what kind of writer did he consider himself? And Wodehouse said that there are two kinds of writers. One who writes a musical comedy without music, which is what I do, and the other kind of writer who delves down deep in life and doesn't give a damn. And that's the kind of writer you're talking about, the kind of writer who delves deep down into real life and doesn't give a damn. Because as a writer, if you have something to say on the subject, you should say it. But as I say, you don't. And I get the sense from your question, your hesitancy, that you want to approach the subject with some degree of tact. But, if you've got a story burning to come out, you need to write it. And not give a damn. Comics Gatekeeper. As an indie writer and self-publisher, I have no editors, as my imprint is just me and my old beaten-up PC. What should I do to get a second opinion on my books, bearing in mind that I'm broke as hell? Well, welcome to the club, pal. The hardest thing for a writer to get is someone whose opinion they care about to read their work, because it's an imposition. You're asking someone to read your stuff and then tell you what they think about it. First of all, you got to find somebody who's going to be brutally, brutally honest with you. My wife writes, and she comes up with stories all the time, and she'll tell me a story like what about this, and she'll tell me the basic plot line, and I'll tell her, yeah, that needs work, or that's great. Now, if I tell her that's great, that's a solid story, that's a solid framework for a novel or screenplay or whatever. And she always says, "Are you just saying that?" And I say, well, why would you come to anybody who would just tell you what you want to hear? Because that's not what you want to hear. You want to hear what's wrong with your story, or is there a problem with your story, or is there something that would make your story better? But so often she comes up with really solid plot lines. It's tempting for me to steal some of them because they're really good, but I won't do that because she'd find out. But what you need is a friend, a relative, someone whose opinion you trust, that is not going to BS you to read it. Someone tough. You can hire an editor, but you don't know anything about them. And as you said, you don't have any money. I'm lucky because I've got Michael Hutchison, who is willing to read my novels. And I call him my nitpicker. He's the nitpicker in chief. And he finds typos and things like that. And he tells me, well, you should do this and you should do that. Well, Mike and I have a completely different approach to fiction, so most of the time I don't listen to him. Probably to my detriment, because Mike's basically speaking for my readership, saying, you should explain this more. I was like, I don't want to explain that more. I like the way I wrote it. So we go around and around. You left this unresolved. Well, I like that that's unresolved. It's not a plot hole. It's unresolved. He's also complimentary and often points things out that I didn't even realize were in the story, or aspects that appealed to him or that made him laugh that I didn't consider that when I wrote it. So you got to find your own Hutch. So who's willing to read the stuff, and you need as many people as you can to read it to proof it, because man, typos hide everywhere. I can reread something I've written 20 times and still miss stuff because it came out of my mind. Those typos are in my brain. So when I read a typo, I don't see it as a typo, if you know what I mean. It's invisible to me. So you need someone else to read it and check it over. But as far as editing, just find someone you trust, whose opinion you trust, who's not going to whitewash you or schmooze you or glad hand you, but tell you brutally, this doesn't work. I was confused by the ending. Your first line sucks. You keep changing the names of the characters. Things like, trust me, that happens. I wrote a Bad Times book, which directly followed the previous Bad Times book, and all the characters were in an enclosed environment. They were all on a ship. And I finished the whole darn thing, sent it off to Hutch, and he said, hey, what happened to this character? I completely forgotten this character was in the previous book. So I had to go back and insert that character, find ways to insert, organically insert that character back into the story, not just every once in a while throw the character's name in to show that they were there. So it's things like that. As many eyes as you can get on it. But again, it's an imposition to ask people to read your stuff. Will you read my screenplay? And I was like, oh, God, no. And then give me your honest opinion. And some people, it's like, no, because I'm going to make you cry. JS, I'm a big fan of your Punisher work since you wrote Moon Knight. You mean, yeah. Biggest thrill for me writing Moon Knight was that I got to cross over with Punisher. It's my first Punisher stories are actually him teamed with Moon Knight. At times you've written them together. They almost seem like friends. Obviously Frank is a loner, but some Marvel characters seem to have a reasonable level of respect for Frank. Wolverine at times seems to be another. They've had some friendly team-ups. Could there be 3 other Marvel characters that could get along with Frank for a few nights at least? No. I mean, guys like Captain America, they're too freaking principled to hang out with Frank Castle. He's an outlaw. He's a lawbreaker. Daredevil is too much of a choir boy, although I love writing the two of them together. Because Frank is just, he can't help but abuse Daredevil because he thinks he's silly. He thinks he's not grounded in reality the way Frank obviously is, going around shooting people. I think the reason when I wrote Moon Knight and Punisher together that they got along so well was because obviously Punisher has no idea who Moon Knight is, but he gets a sense that he is also a former soldier. And when I wrote Moon Knight, he didn't have the 3 personalities. It was editorially driven that he only be Mark Spector, who was a mercenary. And so Frank realizes this guy's got a military background, so they have an understanding. They're both outside the law. They're both vigilantes, and they sort of have that shared experience, even though Frank has no idea what Mark Spector's military background is. So I think that was the basis for it. Now, Wolverine, I know he's been teamed with Wolverine. I never wrote that. I've never written any Wolverine. I can see that to a point, but I can also see where Frank and Logan would get on each other's nerves after a while. A long car ride with these two would probably end up in tears and blood. So I think in some ways they're too similar characters to actually be friends. And I don't know if Frank Castle can ever have friends. I think the closest I ever wrote to a friend was the character Ice Phillips, who had served in Vietnam with Punisher. And I had Ice Phillips. He was a sniper character, and he appeared a number of times when I was writing the Nam, and then I had him show up again a number of times when I was writing Punisher War Journal and Punisher Warzone. And he and Frank, literally had the shared experience of being, in the same area of operations in Vietnam. So Frank knew he could rely on him, and that's really all Frank cares about. Can I use you? Two others, I created two other allies, Lynn Michaels, the female Punisher, and Payback. But I don't think Punisher ever saw them as friends or even allies. He saw them as people that he could use because he kind of disapproved of them imitating him. He did not see imitation as the sincerest form of flattery. He just saw them as getting in the way and making more trouble for him, and also diluting his own image because he relied on fear of him. And he didn't like the idea that these two other characters were kind of confusing people, that there may be more than one Punisher. I think Frank Castle liked the idea of being a loner. Frank Jackson. Showdown between John Wayne and Clint Eastwood in the Old West. Who wins? Yeah. Well, you got to kind of look at the history of the Western. When John Wayne appears on the scene in Westerns, from Stagecoach on, it's the beginning of the adult Western, because previous to John Wayne dominating the Western genre, Westerns were seen as Saturday matinee fare. They were for kids. They were not serious. The cowboys sang and strummed guitars and had funny sidekicks. And in a lot of these, nobody ever dies. They get shot in the hand, lots of fist fights and horse chases, but there's not a lot of people being gunned down or bloody Indian raids or massacres or starvation or anything else. They're just, action-filled odors with lots of songs and dancing and funny stuff going on. So John Wayne comes along and represents sort of an evolution of the Western hero, but he's still the ideal of the Western hero. He's forthright and brave and courageous, and he's going to look out for the widows and orphans, and he's going to stop the bad guys, and he's going to single-handedly end the Indian War just by being a tough guy. And this has no bearing on what the characters of the Old West were really like. And then along comes Clint Eastwood, who is much closer, probably. As fantastical as the spaghetti westerns are, The Man with No Name is, and all of Clint Eastwood westerns, for the most part, are much closer to the way the characters of the Old West probably really were. And they were, out for themselves, self-interest. They weren't looking out for the widows and orphans for the most part. You were out to make a buck or out to just simply survive. There was a lot of drinking going on, a lot of hanging out with loose women, a lot of hard work. A lot of these guys wore themselves to a frazzle by the time they were in their mid-30s, because it was a brutal existence out west. If you were on a cattle drive or rode for the cavalry, or were a miner, or any of the other, horrible back-breaking ways there were to make money in the West. This is the reason that John Wayne and Clint Eastwood never made a movie together. There was always a lot of discussion about the two of them because, John Wayne is, for several generations, the Western hero. Clint Eastwood very clearly takes over that mantle as the number one Western star from John Wayne. And the studios were sex mad to get the two of these in a movie together. Eastwood was interested, Wayne was not, for the simple reason that Wayne saw no difference between the characters Clint Eastwood played and the kind of characters Bruce Dern played. Bruce Dern famously in The Cowboys shoots John Wayne in the back and kills him. And as we know from watching the Man with No Name movies, he had no problem shooting people in the back. Most of Clint Eastwood's cowboy characters would have no problem shooting a bad guy in the back if they could collect the bounty. I mean, at the end of A Few Dollars More, we see, Clint loading up a ox cart full of dead guys to take in for the bounty, many of whom he didn't really give a chance. If you think about the Man with No Name movies and most Clint Eastwood movies, there's very few in the street, straight up gunfights. Who's fastest? It's usually Clint's got the advantage. The only one I can think of is Pale Rider ends with one, but in For a Few Dollars More, he has that scene where he keeps shooting. He and Lee Van Cleef keep shooting each other's hats off, and that's as close to a toe-to-toe gunfight as I've ever seen in a Clint Eastwood movie, and the point of the scene was that neither of them wanted to kill the other. They just wanted the other to leave town. So, but that said, Clint is closer, and I think he'd win the gunfight because he would get some sort of advantage and he would shoot the Duke in the back. I hate to say that, but this is the way the Wild West was. I mean, guys like Bat Masterson and Pat Garrett and Doc Holliday, these guys were killers. We remember them. Well, not so much Doc Holliday, but we remember these guys as lawmen. Pat Garrett was a former outlaw. Doc Holliday was a degenerate gambler and possibly a drug addict. Bat Masterson would, his favorite weapon was a double-barrel shotgun. He and his brother helped clean up Dodge by simply killing anybody who looked at them sideways. The classic story of the Western town hiring the new sheriff or new marshal to clean up things, and then the town being horrified at the results. It's based in fact. It's why, Wyatt Earp, the Earp brothers, the Masterson brothers, Wild Bill Hickok, guys like that moved from town to town to town because after a while they weren't welcome anymore. Yeah, they cleaned the town up, but, it got violent, it got nasty, and sometimes some people got shot that didn't deserve it. So Clint is a lot closer to a portrayal of an actual Wild West character, a lawman or outlaw or whatever kind of character you'd want. So yeah, my money's on Clint. He'd probably shoot the Duke while he was asleep. And sorry to burst your bubble, but that's the way things broke back in the old days. Okay. This is a hell of a question. Green Adrenaline 6405. I got into comics because they are historical and an important part of our American identity. I agree. For as long as I can remember, Superman has always been my number one favorite superhero, and it's because of his attributes that I also found much fondness in Captain America many years later. I hold much affinity for these two blue Boy Scouts because of their inspirational natures and fighting spirits. Ironically, my two favorite characters were the trailblazers for their respective companies. Supes and Cap have become the ultimate political tools to further the Big Two's own agendas, especially after Superman rescinded his American citizenship and Cap very recently coming out this year and no longer believing in the American dream, in an issue that was released around the time of the 4th. Personally, I think the industry died when those in charge at the Big Two turned their backs on the real Big Two that put them in the history books. Is it safe to say that these two wholesome characters will never regain their integrity because antagonistic Marvel and antagonistic DC have really been gung-ho with anti-American messages in recent years? Pretty sure I already know the answer, but just wanted to hear your input. These characters aren't easy to write because, as you said, they're Boy Scouts. But that doesn't make them simple or simplistic or without nuance or complications. Superman is an absolutely fascinating character. That's why he's been around all this time. He's just not a super strong guy who goes around righting wrongs and mooning over Lois Lane. There's a lot more to this character. The same thing with Cap. And it has a lot to do with their background and who created them. And all of this plays into why they're so indelible and why they're so much a part of pop culture, why they're so beloved, and why, as you rightly point out, 2 comic book companies were founded on them. Their biggest, earliest successes. And there's a reason why they endure despite the negative attention that they get from the companies that publish them. And you're right, it's antagonistic. It's people that apparently are either indifferent or deeply unhappy and don't like these characters. And some writers don't like these characters because they are hard to write if you don't get them. They're not that hard to get. I think you understand what I'm saying. If you responded to them as a kid and still respond to them today and still have fondness for them, then you get these characters. And the fact that you don't like how they've been altered, how they've been changed, informs me even more that you get them. This is such an awesome question that I'm going to devote the next Ask Chuck Dixon entirely to this issue of Superman and Captain America specifically, and how integral they are to the history of American comics. And you're going to get a little comic book history lesson, you're going to get a little world history lesson, and we're going to look into the background of the men who created them and why they created them, how they created them, and how they grew out of the time in which they were created, but without altering them, they're still possibly even more relevant today without being changed. You don't have to change Cap and Superman to make them relevant. They're always going to be relevant because they are eternal, iconic characters representing American ideals, which, are, as we've been informed by the founders, inalienable. So I hate to do this to you all, do a kind of Netflix thing, but this question is to be continued because it's just too deep. I've given you the overview, but I did a lot of thinking about this question, and I've been asked this question in similar ways in other chapters or other episodes of this show, and I've kind of chewed around the edges, of it, and I've kind of, covered it a little bit, but always, I don't think I've delved into it enough to really give it a proper analysis of Superman, Captain America, and what they're all about and what they mean to all of us, even if we're not aware of it. So tune in next week. This will be the only question I answer. I will review this, and thank you so much for this question and all the other people who have asked similar questions on this topic, but I really want to get into it more. Hey, if you've got an awesome question like that, contact me at brunobookstore@gmail.com. For those of you who are only listening to this, that's brunobookstore@gmail.com. It's the most direct way of reaching me. I read the comments section on YouTube, and every once in a while, questions will come over the transom at Facebook. But the best way to reach me, most direct way to reach me, is the Gmail site, because I check it several times a day. And Archive and Arctunes, I mentioned it before. Free, digital, high res, lots of genres, exciting comics, updated weekly. You could help me out if you like Arctunes, if you like what I'm doing there. You go to Patreon, then there's an Archive account, which is only mine. It's only to fund my Arctunes series. Basically, to pay my artists and keep everything going. Someday I might even pay myself. But if you go to Patreon and support $1, $3, $5, it all helps. It all adds up. And it's allowed me to finance the various series like Go Monster Go, Something Big, My Sister Suprema, and the upcoming Ferocious. So, all these series that are my series, that are creator-owned, are financed through this Patreon account. So if you would think about it, hey, $1, You got a buck. They add up, and it helps a lot. And I can keep doing this, and you'll have my eternal gratitude. So that's pretty much it for me this week. I will see all of you down the road. Thanks for watching.